Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. Lenses that reach up to 5 times of macro magnification are very, very rare. And the new AstrHori 25mm F2.8 2 to 5 times macro or ultra macro lens immediately becomes the cheapest way to achieve a 5 times level of macro magnification. Now, ultra macro photography is pretty challenging, but it certainly helps when you can jump into it for just $249 US. So that makes this lens intriguing on that premise alone. So the question is the AstrHori 25mm F2.8 2 to 5 times macro lens worth it? Let's find out together. Now, this lens comes in a variety of lens mounts. It comes in Sony E-mount, which is what I've tested here. You can get it in Nikon Z, Canon RF, Leica L, and then Fuji X mounts. Now, obviously it's designed for full frame sensors. However, it can also be used on APS-C, where that 1.5 times crop factor is going to give you a approximately 37.5mm effective angle of view. This lens is all metal, and it does feel fairly dense in the hand. It weighs in at 474 grams, or right over a pound. Part of the reason why it feels so dense in the hand is the fact that it is going to extend and almost double in length when you get it out to the 5 times magnification level. And so that means all of that extra lens, when it's actually retracted, is all there, and so it feels fairly dense in the hand. So when you zoom it out, so to speak, to the 5 times level of magnification, the lens grows from about 95 up to 174 millimeters in length, or about 6.5 inches. Now, one thing that's really important to know about a lens like this is that this is actually a fixed focus lens. What that means is that this is a purely macro lens. You are only going to be able to operate from the 2 to 1 to 5 to 1, or the 2 times to 5 times macro range. Nothing outside of that. No one-time magnification, no portrait distance, and definitely no infinity. It is fixed focus, and that means you're always going to be operating at a very close focus distance when using this. Now, obviously, because the lens becomes quite long, the minimum focus distance figure will be a little bit deceiving, but how it practically works out. And so all the time you're going to be working really closely with this lens, and that becomes really relevant in just a moment, and something else we'll talk about. Now, the secondary ring here at the front is the aperture ring. Aperture runs from f2.8 to f16. It is just full stop clicks there. The one thing to be aware of that's true of any macro lens when you're working at this close of focus distances, that physics does mess with the aperture. So what you're controlling here is the physical size of the aperture. And so you can see the aperture close down as you move from f2.8 towards f16. But as light enters into it, the close focus distance does change the physics of things. So basically, just understand that at 5 times level of magnification, even an f2.8 aperture, it behaves more like f12. And when you're shooting on a very high resolution body, as I am, using the Sony a7R Mark V, which is 61 megapixels, that means that already diffraction is starting to take a hit even at maximum aperture, and if you stop it down, particularly towards f16, you're really going to see a softening of the image as a byproduct of that. It also means that this kind of photography, you have to have a lot of light, and so you need to find a way to get a lot of light on your subject, because you're going to be working with very small effective maximum apertures, not a lot of light reaching the sensor. Now, the aperture iris itself has 8 blades. These blades are not curved. So what that means is that when you're stopped down, in some situations you will see a slight octagonal shape to your specular highlights. It's not a huge deal because the blade count is relatively high, but just know that it won't be perfectly circular in shape. Now, a lens like this, there are no electronics. That means that while most things operate fine, there's certain information that won't be communicated to the camera, namely the lens designation, the aperture that's chosen. So some of those things you're going to have to guess at in post if you're looking for that information, or make notes otherwise. And if you're wanting to use something like in-body image stabilization, you'll have to manually set that. But know that this is not a lens you can use handheld, basically under any circumstance. Depth of field is just too tiny, and it just isn't going to work. So you're going to need a good steady tripod and some good technique. Now, while there is a front cap that is included here, there is no lens hood, there is no filter threads, nor is there any kind of light included. So if you're going to want some kind of macro light assembly, you're going to have to deal with that separately. So before we jump into the image quality breakdown, let me just give you a few quick tips on if you've never done this type of photography. Depth of field is incredibly tiny when you're operating at these kinds of magnification levels. So for example, this shot is the edge of a knife, and this shot is the threads on just a tiny little screw. In other words, depth of field is really, really small, and so you're going to have to probably use some focus stacking. For example, this result here, just to get all of the word 5, this is from an American nickel 5-cent piece. To get all of that word 5 in focus, I had to use 5 different shots and then combine them in actually editing software to get enough depth of field to even have all of that in focus. And so just know that you're probably going to need to do that. And also, because focus is fixed, it means that you're not going to be able to change the distance to your subject through just focus. It means you're going to have to move the camera. And so you're going to want an effective way to do that. And that may include something like focus rails. Very likely, you're probably going to want to have the ability to have a horizontal extension on your tripod, and so that you can actually move the camera closer to the subject, because otherwise it gets really complicated to try to get your subject in the position you need to get close enough to actually focus on it. And the other thing that I think is important to know with this kind of photography is to be patient. This is not the kind of photography you do quick, and it takes a little bit more effort, but of course the results can be pretty astounding if you take the time. So when it comes to the image quality from the lens, I'll give you a quick overview, and then there'll be a detailed image quality breakdown at the end of the video if you want to jump ahead to that. It is time-stamped in the description below. So actually, there are 10 elements in 7 groups, a fairly simple optical formula. And the good news is that there really isn't much in terms of optical flaws here. There is very, very low vignette. I never actually saw vignette to be an issue with any of my images. Distortion is basically non-existent. And you can see actually from this shot of a $2 bill, here's the $2 bill, here is the "In God We Trust" section that we're looking at. And you can see, however, that all of those lines are nice and straight. No evidence of distortion there. Now, really important for this type of photography is that longitudinal chromatic aberrations are very low. With such shallow depth of field and the need to get a lot of light on your subject, there will often be shiny reflective surfaces that pretty commonly would show color fringing of some kind if this was not well controlled. Fortunately, it is well controlled here, and you can see in these shots that there's, even on very shiny surfaces, that there's really no fringing to see. And here in a series from F2.8 to F16, we can see that throughout that whole range that the chromatic aberrations are well controlled. So great stuff there. There's also fairly good sharpness from F2.8 on. It's not the sharpest macro lens that I've used, and diffraction, of course, is softening because the magnification is so high here. So the contrast is not amazing, but at a pixel level, but overall the images do look detailed, they look contrasty. You know, at the way that we actually look at images, they look just fine. The bokeh is also quite good, and by the way, very easy to get with these levels of magnification. You can see in this shot, for example, of a needle and thread, that just a little bit of curvature of the spool of thread means that it's already completely defocused. And that just shows you how easy it is to defocus things and get nice bokeh with a lens like this. So overall, the image quality performance is actually quite good. I have no real complaints to give about that. In conclusion, this is the type of photography that feels really restrictive at first. You have to do extra things that you're not accustomed to doing in other types of photography, but it's something that gets increasingly fun as you get into it. And as I've done this review, it might feel kind of off-putting, some of the extra attention to detail that you have to give. But there's something about that that really does give a sense of fulfillment when you really nail an image that just sparkles as a byproduct of using this. It's right in the dead of winter right now here in Ontario, Canada, and this is actually a great type of winter photography option. You don't need a lot going on. You can take very small objects and create a little tiny working space, and you can explore tiny worlds indoors. And so it's maybe a way to stir up those creative juices during the long and otherwise maybe non-photography months of winter for you. Otherwise, this lens is pretty great bang for the buck, and the more that I used it, the more that I enjoyed using it as I began to work around some of the limitations and be able to get the kind of unique images that frankly you just can't get any other way. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you want more information, you can either look at the text review that is linked in the description down below. There's an image gallery link there along with some buying links. And if you want more information about the optical performance, stay tuned right now, and we're going to jump into our deep dive. So first of all, here we have an image that has not been corrected anyway. And so this shows that vignette is really not an issue. You can see that in the corners look nice and bright, so no issue there. As noted previously, this is a very close-up shot of a $2 bill, American $2 bill. And in this section, you can see there's lots of vertical lines going across the bill. And if we look towards the edges here, you're not really seeing any curvature of those lines. No distortion really to see here either. So to give you a little bit of perspective, here is a look at that overall $2 bill. So those vertical lines we were looking at is actually in this zone right here. Now, we're going to take a look at what 2x magnification looks like of this group of gentlemen here, and then what 5x magnification looks like. So obviously I took that previous shot with a different lens, as we can get no further away than this and still have any kind of focus. So that shows us with this group at 2x magnification, and then this is what it looks like at 5x magnification, and that is obviously an extremely high level of magnification on that single bill. So let's take a look here for those longitudinal chromatic aberrations that are obviously going to be something that's really important to be controlled in a macro lens, and particularly one that gets in this close, because every bit of fringing is just going to be exaggerated because the pixels are just so close. So we can see in even these places where there's highlights of light kind of bouncing off there, that there is no fringing to be seen. And as we look here, this is being our plane of focus, as we look before and then after the plane of focus, just not really seeing any fringing there. Now this shot is at f2.8, which would be the aperture that we would be most likely to see fringing. You can see there are some really bright points, and on these really bright areas, I can see a little bit of fringing. And as you begin to stop the lens down, that's f4, they're reduced. By f5.6 here, they are basically gone, and so no longer an issue. And that honestly was the worst that I could find. You can see in this shot of all these shiny areas that there's just no evidence of any fringing there. So a really strong performance when it comes to controlling longitudinal chromatic aberrations. Now, because diffraction will come so early on a high-resolution body like this, which is 61 megapixels, what I found is that I've got f2.8 on the left, I've got f4 on the right, and frankly, I don't really see much difference in terms of sharpness here. Depth of field obviously is going to be a little bit larger with f4, and so maybe that's one reason to consider. I do think there's a little bit better contrast if you look at the fibers that make up the paper here, but overall, really not much of a difference. I've stopped down now to f5.6 on the right side, and if we continue to examine, again, depth of field is going to increase, so there's going to be more that's in focus, and there's a little bit better contrast in some of that writing. There's also some areas where it feels like diffraction has made the image a little bit softer, and so there is some give and take as you stop down. On down to f8 there on the right side. And what you can see is in the upper part of the image, definitely diffraction has reduced contrast somewhat. Now, there's detail that's present because of the depth of field increasing, and so that may be one reason if you really need to increase that depth of field. But you can see that there is some give and take in other areas of the image due to the effects of diffraction just softening the image just a little bit. Now here's our minimum aperture of f16, and you can see just side by side, there's not a tremendous amount of difference, but you are going to see a difference in areas near the edge of the frame, and that's just largely because there's more in focus, and it allows the sharpness thus to be more consistent across the frame. Though you can also see some areas near the center of the frame, like this, where diffraction has softened the image, where it frankly doesn't look anywhere as good as what f2.8 does here on the left. Now, one oddity that I observed is that if I use the metering in the camera, it metered correctly. So we start at 1/30th of a second for f2.8. But what we should end up with is a 1 second exposure at f16, which I manually shot here on the right. You can see that it's pretty dramatically overexposed. The image on the left is what the camera metered, which is actually 2 stops less and so this is metering more like f8 rather than f16. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. It could be just the effects of the physics on the close focus. It could also be that this aperture doesn't have as much variability as what it shows. And because you can only focus at minimum focus distance, then there's really no other kind of way to test that. And so this is what it is. And so it's not a huge deal, but just note that you may not get all the way to f16. It seems like there's less variability in the aperture range than what maybe there should be. So in conclusion, let's talk about the bokeh here. And you can see that f2.8 on the left and then f5.6 on the right. Obviously, there's some trade-off here. f2.8 has such a shallow depth of field that very little is in focus, but the bokeh is very soft and more round. You stop on down to f5.6, a little bit more is in focus, so the image has a little bit more punch in one sense. But at the same time, you can see that you're seeing that octagonal shape of the aperture iris, and so the bokeh isn't quite as soft or as pleasing. There's always trade-offs when you're shooting images, and you just have to kind of determine what is most important to you. As I noted in my intro, this isn't the sharpest macro lens that I have used, but for $250, it's pretty great, and obviously being able to get such high levels of magnification really give you a lot of versatility in the kinds of things that you can capture. So thanks for sticking around to the end, and as always, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.